Hey folks, in the next few mini movies, I would like to give you a few tips and tricks in how you could approach the modeling part. Specifically, when, for example, you have to build an object that you never did before, because your biggest challenge actually will be knowing all the dimensions and proportions. 2D sketches are pretty cool. You have the outlines and you can clearly block parts out, but you don't have any depth information with it. And in this file, I already have the human figure, which I could pose, but it still doesn't really give me any information about, for example, the width of my handlebar, the pedals, the wheels, etc. So one easy way in that case is simply to import a very primitive object. So we could use it as a three-dimensional placeholder for the bike. And there's one service online. When you go to, I use Chrome, go to web and type in Google Warehouse. Then you will find 3D Warehouse Sketchup. That's an online library of freely available computer models, and you can clearly see that you have everything from objects to architecture. And for example, if I type in bicycle and then hit search, it shows you all the different models people, for example, uploaded. And here's, for example, a nice sports bike. For my case, I'm going to use this bamboo bicycle because it's very basic, but that's all I really need. And I don't want to have too much stuff inside my scene. To download this file, you could go to download and then use the Sketchup. And to get Sketchup, which is another program, you can open another web browser and then type in Sketchup. And that will bring you to Trimble Sketchup. Trimble is now the new owner. Before it was Google, but it still remains free. So when I go to download SketchUp, there is a pro version, which costs money, which is not necessarily what you need. You can also simply download the free version, and that will do the job for us. The pro version has few extra pieces we might not necessarily need actually for just converting that file. Then I open this file inside SketchUp, and with the middle mouse button I can, for example, rotate around. See, here you have, similar like in Blender, different object groups with those elements in it. And this bamboo rack I don't need, so I select it and click delete. And now I would like this model to be transferred into Blender, and SketchUp doesn't talk with Blender or any other program, so I have to export actually this mesh. So I could go to File, Export, and then 3D Model. Then I save it on my desktop. The file format you only can use with the free version is Collada. If you have the pro version, you will have Wavefront OBJ, which should be your choice. Then I click export. And then it's basically writing this polygon model into a different file format, which other programs can read. So if I go to Blender, go to File, Import, Collada. Here I have my bike file. Then I can click on Import. And the file is 12.6 megabyte big. That's already a little bit on the large side, so you see it took a second. And here is my model. It came in pretty big, so I have to scale it down a little bit. and let's take a look at it. Mainly everything came in well, but you see that there are some small issues. So that sometimes can happen with the Collada file format, and sometimes the programs write the information into that file format slightly different, and then the import plugins for that file format can read it differently. So it's sometimes a hit and miss, and I decide that this for me is not usable because it just has too much garbage. So what I have to do is, let me open this again so it's nice and fresh. You can go to the web and go to Mesh Lab. And Mesh Lab is a free program that can open a lot of different file formats, as you can see here, and then export them into different file format again. So it's a really nice 3D file converter, and you can download it for Mac or PC, and it's free. And let me go to Mesh Lab and import mesh. Go to my desktop, and here I have my bike Collada. I click open. Okay. And then Mesh Lab is analyzing that file and then loading it. It takes a small second, and there it is. And there, for example, you see here we have our pedals as well. They were actually lost in the import we had in Blender. And then I could go to File, Export Mesh As, and then select Alias Wavefront OBJ. Click Save. I don't need the textures. Click OK. And then it's writing this bike then into the OBJ file format, which is also a polygon mesh file format that works basically with all CAD programs. And then I go to File, Import Wavefront. And here is my bike. And I click Import. And now this one is 22 megabytes, so it takes a little bit longer to load. And there it is. So it's too large, so I have to scale it down. And it's also rotated, so I could go to the transform property and set it to 0. And then, as you can see, my object center is here, but my mesh is on the right side. So I have to change that object center. And it's a very symmetrical object. So I click my object, go into edit mode. Then I try to select a piece of geometry that is really nicely at the center of my mesh. And then I press Shift S and say, move my 3D cursor to the selected. And then I leave the edit mode, go into object mode. And then I could, inside the object tools, click on origin and say, set my object 3D center where my 3D cursor is. And now you see here's my newly set object center. Okay, so with this done, we could, for example, rotate this object along the z-axis by minus 90 degrees. And then I can maybe slightly move it to there. And the bike is still somewhat off, so I should probably reset my x-axis and maybe my y-axis. The z I don't change because that affects the height. So if I set this one to 0, of course it moves this 3 point to here, which is not what I want. And then I can do a little bit of cleanup. Well, maybe it's actually easier if I go into edit mode to select all my mesh and then simply move this one up. And from a side view, all I have access to is kind of like moving the mesh left and right, up and down. So I can't move it along the width. So I could eyeball the position of my mesh to that object center this way, because then I could actually say 0, 0. And then my bike is basically with that object center sitting on the ground plane. Because if I press S now, you see that it scales towards the ground plane. And it might be easier to quickly adjust this way the size of my object so that maybe it starts somewhat getting close to the proportion of my initial sketch. And I also noticed that the front bike is a little bit lower. So in a side view, I might have to rotate this object a little bit. And again, this is, we bring this in only as a helper, so it doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. And because I rotated this object, I would like to bake that rotation so that in here I have everything 0, 0 and just the z-axis. So I could go to apply and then say apply rotation. Actually, I could also say apply scale. So everything is reset to 0. So basically that scale and the rotation is baked. So yeah. Okay, so at this point, I basically can then go ahead and start posing my figure. And I'm going to show you that in the next video.